In prison, silence is always mistaken for weakness. She never fought back, never raised her voice, and everyone thought she was harmless. But when the toughest gang in the yard decided to corner her, they discovered the truth. The quiet girl they mocked was the one prisoner they should have feared the most. When she first arrived at the prison, no one paid her much attention. She walked through the gates with her head down, hands cuffed in front of her, and eyes fixed on the ground. To the other inmates, she looked small, fragile, and out of place. She never looked around, never tried to size anyone up. She simply kept her silence, moving quietly to her cell, as if she had already accepted her fate. The first days were the hardest. The cafeteria was always loud with voices, clattering trays, and mocking laughter. She would stand in line without speaking, take her food, and walk straight to the corner table where no one else sat. She didn't glance at anyone, didn't answer when taunted, didn't defend herself when her portion was smaller than the others. She ate quickly, head bowed, then left without a word. To the others it seemed like weakness. In prison, silence was blood in the water, and they could all smell it. Whispers started spreading almost immediately. Some said she was in for stealing a handbag, others for cheating at cards, or maybe for some pathetic, tiny crime that didn't even belong behind these walls. One woman snickered that she must have cried through her whole trial, begging the judge for mercy. The story twisted and grew, and by the end of the week, everyone believed she was nothing more than a scared little thief who got herself locked up by mistake. The rumors made the stronger inmates bolder. Every day brought a new insult tossed her way. One would nudge her tray so her food spilled. Another would bump into her shoulder hard just to watch her stumble. They laughed at how she never fought back, never even raised her voice. To them she was invisible, a shadow with no bite. She was an easy target, and in prison, an easy target never stays safe for long. Inside she carried the weight of her secret like a stone chained to her chest. She felt every word, every laugh, but she swallowed it all down. She kept her face calm, her eyes lowered, her lips sealed. No one could read what was inside her. No one could see the fire she kept buried, the strength she chose to hide. To the world around her, she looked powerless. But deep down, she was holding back for reasons they would never understand. The others mistook her composure for fear. One afternoon in the yard, a pair of women blocked her path, circling like predators. One of them leaned in close and sneered. "What are you gonna do?" cried to the guards. "Pathetic. You probably begged your way in here." The group behind them laughed, cruel and sharp, waiting for her to crack. But she didn't move, didn't flinch. She simply let the insult slide past her, as if it didn't matter, then stepped around them and kept walking. That silence made the bullies restless. They wanted a reaction, and the more she refused to give them one, the more determined they became to break her. Day after day, the pressure built. Every whispered rumor, every shove in the hallway, every mocking laugh was fuel for their cruelty. But to her each moment was also a test. She told herself to endure it, to keep her secret locked away for as long as she could. She was not afraid of them. What she feared was what would happen if she let herself loose, if she showed them what she was really capable of. For now, it was safer to stay quiet, safer to remain the shadow they all mocked. But prison has its own way of pushing people to the edge, and in places where weakness is hunted, silence can only last so long before the predators close in. The gang had already decided she was their prey. The more she stayed quiet, the more convinced they became that she would never fight back. And the more they believed that, the bolder and more dangerous their attacks would become. What none of them realized was that her silence wasn't weakness. It was discipline. She wasn't afraid of them. She was afraid of herself, of the storm she kept buried beneath that calm face. They thought they were circling a lamb. What they were really circling was a wolf in disguise. And soon they would learn just how wrong they had been. It happened on a gray afternoon in the prison yard, the kind of day when the air feels heavy and everyone is restless. She was carrying her tray, keeping to herself the way she always did, moving toward that lonely corner where no one dared to sit. But before she could reach it, shadows closed in around her. A group of inmates, the same ones who had whispered about her since the first week, blocked her path with smirks on their faces and mischief in their eyes. One of them stepped forward, tall and broad, the kind who liked to make others feel small. With a single shove, she knocked the tray out of the quiet girl's hands. Food spilled across the dirt, the smell rising into the air as laughter echoed around the yard. The girl looked down at the mess for a long moment, her face unreadable, then slowly lifted her eyes back to the group. She said nothing. She didn't move. That silence only made the bullies grin wider. Another woman grabbed her by the arm, yanking her as if daring her to resist. The crowd began to notice. Conversations stopped, heads turned, and soon the whole yard was watching. Some looked on with pity, shaking their heads as if to say, "She's going to get crushed." Others leaned forward with curiosity, sensing that something about this moment was different. The tension in the air was thick, every eye locked on the scene unfolding. The bullies were enjoying themselves. They fed on the attention, on the gasps and whispers from the crowd. To them this was sport. They had chosen the weakest target in the yard, and now they were putting on a show. One of them sneered, leaning close so everyone could hear the words. "What are you going to do? Cry to the guards?" The others burst into laughter, certain they had humiliated her. Through it all, the girl stood calm, too calm. She didn't pull away, didn't fight back, didn't even raise her voice. Her stillness was almost unsettling, as though she wasn't even part of the same moment. For the bullies, her calm was frustrating. They wanted fear. They wanted begging. They wanted her to snap. But she gave them nothing. Inside her, though, the storm was building. Every insult, every shove, every stolen piece of dignity weighed on her shoulders like a stone. She felt the heat rising in her chest, the pulse quickening in her veins. She wasn't scared of them. She was scared of herself, of the line she was standing on, of what might happen if she crossed it. For weeks, she had buried her strength, locked it deep away, convincing herself that silence was the safest choice. But the lock was starting to crack. The yard grew quieter as the standoff dragged on. The laughter dulled into murmurs, then faded into a tense hush. Even the guards along the fence began to notice, their eyes narrowing as they shifted in place. Everyone could feel it now. Something was about to break. One of the bullies shoved her again, harder this time, almost daring her to fall. Still, she didn't stumble. She planted her feet, steady as stone, her eyes locked on theirs without blinking. That look unsettled them, though they didn't admit it. It was the kind of look that didn't belong to a weak girl. It was the kind of look that promised a storm if they pushed too far. But arrogance makes people blind. The leader of the group stepped closer, towering over her with a cruel grin. "You don't belong here," she hissed. "We own this yard, and you're nothing." Her words sliced through the silence, meant to break the girl's spirit once and for all. The girl took a slow breath, her chest rising and falling as her calm face finally shifted. Not with fear, not with anger, but with something sharper, colder, something the bullies had never seen before. The crowd leaned in, sensing the change, holding their breath as if waiting for lightning to strike. The bullies didn't see it yet, but the onlookers did. They saw the spark in her eyes, the subtle shift in her stance, the way her silence no longer felt like surrender. It felt like control. It felt like the warning before a storm. The yard had turned into a stage, and everyone was waiting for the first move. The bullies thought they were in charge, thought they had broken her down to nothing. But they had made a mistake. They had pushed too far. Her silence was about to end. And when it did, nothing in that prison yard would ever be the same again. The breaking point came in a single heartbeat. The leader of the bullies curled her fist, eyes flashing with cruel delight, and swung hard toward the quiet girl's face. For weeks the girl had swallowed every insult, every shove, every cruel laugh. But this time, her silence ended. Her hand shot up with lightning speed, catching the bully's wrist mid-air. With a sharp twist, precise and deliberate, the bully cried out in pain, stumbling backward as gasps exploded across the prison yard. The sound was enough to freeze everyone in place. For the first time, the crowd saw something they had never expected. The girl who never spoke, who never fought, was holding her attacker in place like a child's toy. Her movements weren't wild or sloppy. They were clean, calculated, controlled. She released the wrist just as quickly, letting the bully fall back. Clutching her arm in disbelief, another inmate rushed forward, rage on her face, determined to prove the girl wasn't as strong as she appeared. But the moment she lunged, the girl's body moved like water, smooth and unshakable. She sidestepped, grabbed the woman's arm, and flipped her to the ground in one swift motion. The impact echoed across the yard. Dust rose. The crowd erupted into shouts of shock. And yet the girl stood calm, her breathing steady, her eyes sharp and clear. She didn't move with anger. There was no rage in her strikes, no reckless fury. Every motion was measured, every step precise. Like someone who had trained her body for years, who knew exactly how much force to use and when to stop. Her silence wasn't gone, it had simply changed shape. Now it radiated from her like power, like authority, wrapping the entire yard in a heavy electric tension. The bullies who had laughed moments earlier stumbled back, their bravado dissolving into fear. They had spent weeks mocking her, calling her weak, treating her like prey. But in a matter of seconds, the roles had flipped. They weren't the hunters anymore. They were the ones cornered. The watching inmates felt the shift, too. Awe rippled through the crowd as whispers spread like wildfire. "She's trained," one voice gasped, barely above a whisper, but loud enough to be heard by everyone nearby. Heads nodded, eyes widened, respect replacing the mockery that had once followed her everywhere. The guards along the fence leaned forward, alert but hesitant. They weren't seeing a brawl anymore. They were witnessing a display of skill, something far more dangerous and precise. Even they didn't dare rush in just yet. The girl stood tall in the center of the yard, her eyes burning with quiet authority. She looked at the bullies who had tormented her, and in that gaze was no fear, no doubt. For weeks she had chosen silence. She had chosen to endure. But now her strength was undeniable, carved into every movement, every breath. She wasn't weak. She had never been weak. The bullies stumbled to their feet, their confidence shattered. Their hands shook, their eyes darted, searching for a way out. But there was none. They had awakened something they couldn't control. The girl they thought they could break was stronger than all of them combined. And worse, she wasn't even trying. She had defended herself with the ease of someone who had done this many times before. Around her, the atmosphere had shifted completely. No one saw her as a target anymore. No one saw her as the quiet, fragile girl in the corner. Now they saw the truth. A woman who had chosen silence not because she was powerless, but because she had more power than anyone could imagine. Her secret was bleeding through in every strike, every calm step she took across the yard. And though she hadn't spoken a word, her actions spoke louder than anything she could have said. Her silence was not weakness. It was discipline. It was control. And as the bullies backed away, Trembling in fear, the crowd held its breath, because deep down, they all knew this was only the beginning. The mask had slipped. The truth had cracked through. The girl's hidden strength had been revealed, and the prison hierarchy was about to change forever. The yard was no longer laughing. It was waiting to hear who she really was, waiting for the story behind the storm they had just seen unleashed. And as the bullies cowered in the dirt, the quiet girl stood tall, her secret on the edge of being exposed. The truth of her past, the reason for her silence, was about to come to light in the most dramatic way possible. The tension in the prison yard snapped like a brittle string. The leader of the bullies, her pride wounded and her authority crumbling, lunged forward in a desperate attempt to reclaim control. Her fists were clenched, her face twisted in rage, but she was too slow. In one swift motion, the quiet girl sidestepped, caught her arm, and slammed her to the ground with brutal efficiency. The sound of the impact echoed off the concrete walls. Dust rose, and then silence. The yard froze. Dozens of inmates who had been laughing only minutes before now stood motionless, their eyes wide, their mouths half open. Even the birds circling overhead seemed to pause. The bully leader lay in the dirt, gasping for breath, her confidence shattered. She tried to get up, but the girl's stance, calm and unshaken, made her hesitate. For the first time since entering those gates, the quiet girl was no longer seen as prey. She was the predator. A guard rushed toward the scene, boots pounding against the cracked pavement, his whistle shrieking through the air. But when he reached the circle of inmates, he stopped short. He had seen fights before, wild, chaotic, fueled by rage. But this was different. The way the girl had moved wasn't frantic. It wasn't desperate. It was precise, practiced, dangerous. She wasn't lashing out like an inmate losing control. She was executing like someone who had been trained. The guard's eyes narrowed. He didn't see just another prisoner. He saw someone who didn't belong in chains at all. Murmurs began to ripple through the crowd, soft at first, then louder, spreading like fire. She's not a thief. She's something else. Did you see that? She's trained. Nobody moves like that unless they've done it before. The rumors that had once painted her as weak and pitiful were dissolving right in front of everyone. In their place came new stories, whispered theories about who she really was. Someone close to the front spoke the truth aloud, their voice trembling with realization. She's not in here for stealing. She fought to protect her family. She took the fall so they could walk free. The words hung heavy in the air, and the crowd fell silent again, their eyes darting back to her with a mixture of shock, respect, and fear. She stood tall, breathing steady, her eyes clear. She didn't look ashamed. She didn't look broken. She radiated something far stronger than defiance. It was pride. Pride in what she had sacrificed. Pride in the silence she had carried. Pride in the discipline that had kept her from unleashing her strength until this very moment. The bullies, sprawled in the dirt, were no longer laughing. Their bravado had vanished, their sneers replaced with trembling lips and wide, terrified eyes. One of them tried to speak, her voice cracking. We didn't know, but the excuse fell flat. They had pushed her too far, and now they were living with the consequences. They had picked the wrong prisoner. The rest of the yard knew it too. The hierarchy had shifted in the blink of an eye. The inmates who had once looked down on her now looked up. The silence that had made her invisible now made her untouchable. No one dared to mock her anymore. No one dared to challenge her. They had seen what she was capable of, and none of them wanted to be next. Even the guard, standing only a few feet away, hesitated before blowing his whistle again. His hand twitched at his belt, but he didn't move. He wasn't afraid of chaos breaking out. He was afraid of her. He knew what he had just witnessed. and a thought crept into his mind that he didn't dare say aloud. This girl didn't belong in here with the rest of them. She was something else entirely. The yard held its breath as she stepped back, her face calm once again, as though nothing had happened. She didn't gloat, didn't shout, didn't even look at the bullies she had just broken down. She simply returned to silence, the same silence they had once mocked her for. But now that silence was a weapon. Now it carried weight. It demanded respect. Whispers swirled around her like a storm, stories of her sacrifice, of the family she had protected, of the blame she had chosen to carry on her own shoulders. The inmates who once dismissed her as weak now saw her for what she truly was. A woman strong enough to endure humiliation, strong enough to bury her skills, strong enough to reveal them only when the moment demanded it. The bullies lay humiliated, powerless. Their reign ended in an instant. The rest of the yard watched in awe, knowing that a new order had just been written. No one would ever see the silent girl the same way again. And as she walked calmly back to her bench, every step deliberate, every breath steady, the message was clear. The weak girl was gone. In her place stood the one prisoner no one dared to cross. The guards exchanged wary glances, the bullies cowered, and the inmates whispered her story to one another. The prison hierarchy had shifted forever, and as she sat back down in her corner, her silence wrapped around her once more. Not the silence of a victim, but the silence of someone who had nothing left to prove. The yard would never forget what they had just witnessed, and the respect she had earned would follow her through every locked door and every shadowed hallway inside those walls. The storm she had kept hidden was finally unleashed, and its echo would reshape the prison from this day forward. The yard slowly came back to life, but nothing felt the same. Where moments before there had been laughter and taunts, now there was only silence, heavy and charged with something new. The girl bent down, brushed the dust from her hands, and walked back to her corner. She sat the way she always had, shoulders straight, eyes steady, calm as stone. But now the air around her felt different. The ground seemed to hold its breath beneath her feet. No one dared follow. The bullies who had mocked her, who had shoved and laughed and tried to humiliate her, stayed where they were, too shaken to move. Their eyes dropped to the ground, avoiding hers, their pride broken in front of everyone. The rest of the inmates shifted back, giving her space, not out of pity this time, but out of respect. They knew they had witnessed something unforgettable. Even the guards along the fence were different now. They no longer looked at her as just another name in the system, just another inmate passing through the endless rotation of faces. They watched her with a kind of wary respect, a recognition that she wasn't ordinary. One guard, who had been quick to intervene before, kept his distance, his eyes narrowed but cautious. He had seen too much to mistake her for weak again. The whispers began almost immediately, rippling through the yard like sparks of fire. But they weren't cruel anymore. They weren't mocking. They were curious, reverent, filled with awe. "She's not a thief," one voice murmured. "She took the fall for her family," another replied. Stories spread about her sacrifice, about the strength it took not to fight back all those weeks, to sit quietly when she could have crushed them at any moment. Pity turned to admiration, mockery turned to respect, and she felt it, too. Sitting alone at her bench, she felt the shift like a tide changing direction. For the first time since stepping through those gates, she wasn't being measured by silence. She wasn't being judged for keeping her head down. Her silence had been seen for what it truly was, not fear, not surrender, but control. It was her choice, her shield, her weapon. She had carried her secret with dignity. And now that it was revealed, she no longer needed to explain. The truth was written in the way the yard looked at her. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in deeply, and let herself feel a rare kind of peace. For weeks, she had been holding back, containing the storm, living under the weight of whispers. Now she no longer carried that weight alone. They all knew, they all understood, and for her, that was enough. The bullies stayed far away, their swagger gone. They didn't dare challenge her again, not after the lesson they had learned. They had been exposed in front of everyone, their cruelty shattered against the strength they never saw coming. Now they lived in the shadow of the girl they once called weak. Their humiliation became her crown. From that day on, the yard shifted. The quiet girl who had once been invisible was now untouchable. She didn't need to speak, didn't need to fight, didn't need to demand respect. It was given to her freely, carved into the silence that followed her wherever she walked. She had no need for threats or warnings. Her presence alone was enough. And she carried herself with the same calm as before, never boasting, never gloating. She didn't need to. Power that is real doesn't have to announce itself. She let her silence speak, and it spoke louder than any words could. Sometimes the strongest voices are the ones that never needed to shout. Sometimes silence is not weakness at all, but the greatest kind of strength. She had proved it with every step, every breath, every moment of restraint that led to her revelation. And now the lesson belonged not just to her, but to everyone who had seen it unfold. As the sun dipped lower, and the guards called for the end of yard time, she rose from the bench and walked back to her cell. The other inmates parted to make way for her, their eyes following in quiet respect. No jeers, no laughter, no whispers of weakness followed her anymore. Only silence, the same silence she had carried from the beginning. But this time, it was different. This time, it was hers, and deep down, she knew something simple, something undeniable. True strength doesn't always shout. True strength doesn't always fight for the world to see. Sometimes, the strongest people are the ones who wait, who endure, who hold their power until the moment it is needed most. And when that moment comes, the world never forgets. She had waited. She had endured. She had revealed her strength in silence. And now, she ruled the prison without ever needing to say a word.